When I walked into that penthouse and saw Simone in the hot tub, draped over some guy with a smile that was far too intimate for comfort, I couldn't process what I was seeing. My wife of 5 years, sitting without her shirt, looking all too cozy with Ben, her boss, and Dale, one of the senior partners at Esk Funds. It was like I had walked into a nightmare I could barely wrap my head around. The looks on their faces made it clear what was happening between them, and my stomach dropped. I didn't know whether to confront them right then and there, or to just leave and let the confusion settle. Instead, I did the one thing I could think of in the heat of the moment. I filmed a short video on my phone, documenting what was unfolding in front of me. I sat there, frozen, in the quiet room, trying to make sense of it all. She'd never wanted me to come to the party in the first place, and now I was beginning to understand why. Simone had been working as a secretary at Esk Funds, a prestigious hedge fund firm, for about a year. She always seemed happy, always energetic, and in a good mood. But now I realized the true reason behind it all. Her mood had never been about the work, or the success, or the achievements. It was about the attention she was getting from men, especially her bosses. That explained why she was constantly coming home late, or even the next day, after the monthly company parties. I had never questioned her after those events before. But now, with this image burned into my mind, I knew what had really been happening at those gatherings. Earlier that week, I had come across a message on her phone about a company Christmas party with a +1 invitation. When I asked her about it, she quickly tried to talk me out of going, saying it would probably be boring for me with all the financial talk. Confused, I asked her if she was embarrassed to be seen with me at these events. She reassured me that it wasn't that at all. She insisted it was just that the conversations at these things could get dull, and she didn't want me to be bored. I thought nothing of it at the time, but now, reflecting on it, I realized that had all been a cover. I agreed to stay home that night, feeling frustrated and confused. But when the party night arrived, she suggested I at least get my tux ready, just in case, and mentioned that I should bring swim trunks. Swim trunks for a December Christmas party? The thought didn't make sense to me, but she explained that the party usually ended at her boss's penthouse, where there was a hot tub. She casually mentioned this was a regular occurrence and asked me to promise I would be on my best behavior. I didn't understand why she was telling me this. Was she giving me a warning? It felt like it. She admitted that sometimes things could get a little wild at these parties, and she didn't want me to be upset if things got out of hand. She even mentioned that the men could sometimes get a little too friendly. I brushed it off, telling her that as long as nothing crossed the line of what I considered appropriate for a husband, I wouldn't have an issue. She smiled and kissed me on the cheek, but I could tell from her tone that she wasn't being fully transparent. At the party, Simone introduced me to her friend Linda, who gave me a sly smile and remarked that tonight was going to be fun, calling Simone wild and crazy. That raised a red flag for me, but Simone just laughed it off and walked off with Linda, leaving me to get drinks alone. I waited at an empty table, scanning the room for her, growing more frustrated as time passed. After 2 hours, I finally spotted her again, surrounded by Linda and 3 other guys. One of them had his arm wrapped around Simone's waist, and she greeted me with a tipsy smile and a kiss, tasting faintly of tequila. She casually mentioned they were heading to Ben's place, her boss, where the hot tub awaited. That's when I really began to feel the irritation boiling up inside me. One of the guys grabbed Simone's hand and pulled her away from me, and I followed them to Ben's penthouse, but what I saw there was even worse than I expected. Simone was already in the hot tub with Ben and Dale, acting like everything was normal, just hanging out as if nothing was wrong. But when Linda approached me and hinted that Simone and I had an open marriage based on her behavior with other men, my stomach churned. She told me that Simone had been involved with Ben and Dale for over a year, and the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a prank. This was real. The sickening realization hit me like a tidal wave. Simone had been unfaithful for over a year, and I had been none the wiser. Linda tried to comfort me, but her words fell flat, knowing what I had just discovered. She told me Simone still loved me, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I felt betrayed beyond belief. I couldn't stand it any longer, so I went upstairs to change, hoping that the space would give me time to calm down. But when I came back down, there she was, still lounging in the hot tub with those 2 guys, acting like nothing was wrong. That was it. I couldn't keep pretending. I pulled Simone aside into a private room and demanded to know the truth. I showed her the video I had taken, exposing her betrayal. She tried to brush it off, claiming it was all in good fun, that it didn't mean anything. But to me, it meant everything. I was done. Without saying another word, I took off my wedding ring and placed it in her hand. Then I took off hers. When she asked what I was doing, I told her exactly what I was thinking. I was disgusted by her actions, and I would be filing for divorce on Monday. Her pleas, her declarations of love, fell on deaf ears. I wasn't moved. I remained cold, unemotional, telling her not to come back home. As I left, one of the men called after me, asking why I was leaving so soon, making some crude comment about Simone. Without turning around, I called back, "She's all yours now," and walked out. I drove home, ignoring the barrage of texts and calls she sent my way. Once I arrived, I packed all of Simone's belongings into trash bags and loaded them into her car, which was parked outside. I changed the garage code so she couldn't get back in. By the time I was done, it was past 2:30 a.m., and exhaustion hit me like a freight train. I collapsed into bed and fell asleep instantly. The next morning, the house phone rang, waking me up. It was Simone, asking me to come get her. I was numb as I coldly told her she was no longer my problem and that all communication from now on would go through my lawyer. I reminded her that her car and all her belongings were waiting for her outside. I hung up, then disconnected the house phone, determined never to see or hear from her again. I fell back onto the bed, plugged the phone back in without giving it much thought. By the time I woke up in the afternoon, I felt clear-headed and ready to move forward. The first thing I noticed was that Simone's car was gone. Good. Maybe she finally got the message. I spent the next hour researching divorce lawyers online, diving into all the details about divorce laws in our state. Since we didn't own real estate and had no kids, the process seemed straightforward. Alimony wouldn't be an issue either, since Simone made as much, if not more, than I did. I was relieved. After making a few notes, I found the number for a lawyer named Jenny Hawkins and decided I'd call her first thing Monday morning. Just as I was about to finish up, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, and I initially thought it might be something to do with Simone. I answered, and a female voice introduced herself as Linda. She told me Simone was staying with her for a few days. I wasn't fazed. I confirmed I was moving forward with the divorce, but Linda, sounding genuinely worried, told me Simone was a wreck, crying nonstop and on the edge of a breakdown. I didn't let it bother me. Simone had done this to herself? Linda pushed further, asking if I still had any feelings for Simone. I responded coldly, saying my feelings now were pure hatred and disgust. Simone had not only cheated on me for over a year, but she had humiliated me in front of others, and that was the final straw. Linda tried to defend her, saying Simone loved me, but I wasn't having it. I bluntly asked if Simone had slept with Ben and Dale again after I left the party. Linda hesitated before admitting they had. She suggested I could have enjoyed myself if I had stayed. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I said goodbye to Linda and hung up, feeling sick to my stomach. Later, I noticed 2 text messages from unknown numbers sent early that morning. I opened them, and attached were 2 videos. One message read, "Missed one hell of a party, bro." I hit play on the first video, and there she was, Simone, in the hot tub, involved in intimate activities with 3 men. Ben and Dale were there, but the third man was someone I didn't recognize. He looked right into the camera and grinned, saying, "That's quite a wife you've got there. Bro, too bad you weren't here." My stomach churned, but I couldn't look away. The second video was more of the same, but this time, it ended with Ben holding my wedding ring. Simone handed it to him with a smirk, and my world shattered in an instant. The overwhelming rage coursing through me made my hands shake as I transferred the videos to my computer, making a copy to hand over to the lawyer. For a brief moment, I considered sending the videos to Simone's friends and family, but something held me back. Jenny's website had warned me against any rash moves that could backfire in court, so I decided to hold off for now. The rest of the weekend was quiet. I didn't hear anything from Simone or Linda, and honestly, I was relieved. I spent my time purging Simone's presence from the apartment, throwing away anything that reminded me of her. On Monday, I reached out to my boss and explained the situation. He was surprisingly understanding. He'd been through a similar experience with an unfaithful spouse himself, and he offered me his full support. That afternoon, I met with Ginny at her office. Before I went, I stopped by the bank to make sure Simone couldn't access our joint account. I paid off her credit card and canceled it, then withdrew half the money and opened a new account in my name. Ginny walked me through the divorce laws and suggested we pursue an alienation of affection lawsuit against Simone's employer, though the chances were slim given the evidence I had. Still, it was worth considering, and I agreed to let her handle the delivery of the legal papers. I decided they should be served at Simone's office for maximum impact. After paying the retainer, I headed home. On the way, Linda called again, asking if I would meet with Simone that afternoon. I declined, following Ginny's advice to keep my distance. Linda insisted that Simone wanted to talk, but I gave her Ginny's contact info and ended the call, making it clear that reconciliation was not on the table. I stopped at a store to pick up a 12-pack of beer and a couple of packs of cigarettes. It had been years since I smoked, since before Simone and I got married. But tonight, I needed something to calm my nerves. Later, while sitting on my balcony with a beer in hand, the house phone rang again. It was Ben Carlson, Simone's boss. His voice was different now, more formal, less carefree. He apologized for what happened that Friday night, claiming they had assumed I was okay with what was going on, as Simone had told them we had an open marriage. I wasn't having any of it. I asked him why he hadn't bothered to confirm that with me, especially when he knew we were married. He admitted it was a mistake, but claimed they never intended to ruin my marriage, that it was all just for fun. I wasn't buying it. I laid out my terms. He'd better be ready to testify against Simone in court, and I was planning to sue him for alienation of affection. If he wanted to make things right, he could comply with my demands without any argument. He tried to protest, asking if I was serious about suing them. I made it crystal clear that they had violated their own moral clauses and destroyed my marriage in the process. Ben started backpedaling, saying it wasn't meant to go this far, and that they didn't expect me to react this way. I ended the call, grabbed another beer, and went back out onto the balcony to smoke. For the next few days, things were quiet. I didn't hear from Simone, Linda, or anyone else until Wednesday. That's when the divorce papers were served at Simone's office. Later that day, Linda called, furious that I hadn't given Simone a chance to explain herself. I couldn't care less. Simone had her chance, and she blew it. I told Linda not to call me again and slammed the phone down. That night, Ben called again, but this time, he was furious. He threatened me, saying he'd make my life miserable for filing the lawsuit. I called Ginny immediately to let her know about the threat. Good, she said, we'll use this. I felt a deep sense of frustration, but did as instructed, sitting next to Simone. The air between us was thick with tension, and as I took my seat, I could feel her eyes on me, waiting for me to speak. I didn't look at her, focusing instead on Dr. Farnsworth, who began explaining the purpose of the session. The counselor spoke in a calm, neutral tone, asking us to share our feelings and thoughts on the state of our marriage. Simone, with her eyes cast down, started by talking about how much she regretted what had happened, claiming that everything had been a mistake. She tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled it away sharply, making it clear that I wasn't there for reconciliation. I didn't care about her remorse or regrets at that moment. As far as I was concerned, the damage was done, and no amount of talking could fix it. I looked directly at Dr. Farnsworth, explaining, I'm here because the court said I had to be, but I've already made up my mind. There's no going back. Simone betrayed me, and no apology can change that. Dr. Farnsworth nodded, encouraging both of us to speak openly. Simone's voice quivered as she tried to convince me that it was just a phase, a mistake, but I didn't want to hear it. Every word she spoke felt like a slap in the face, an attempt to rewrite the past. I stared at the ground, my mind racing. The fact that she was pregnant only added to the mess, complicating everything even further. I didn't even know if the child was mine, and part of me didn't care. The emotional weight of it all was suffocating, and I found myself holding back tears of frustration and anger. Simone, on the other hand, looked more defeated than I had ever seen her, but it didn't matter anymore. The truth was, I had lost respect for her. The session dragged on, but I didn't offer anything more. I had nothing left to say to her. Eventually, Dr. Farnsworth turned to me, suggesting that I could leave if I didn't feel comfortable continuing. I stood up without hesitation, nodding toward the door. I wasn't about to sit there pretending like I still cared. I made my exit, leaving Simone behind, my heart heavy with a mixture of anger and relief. As I walked out of the office, I knew what I had to do. I had to take back control of my life. The next steps in the divorce would be long and complicated, especially with the pregnancy looming over everything. But I was done. I had no intentions of going back to her, no matter what happened. The betrayal had sealed our fate. And as for the baby, if it turned out to be mine, I would deal with that in my own time. For now, all I cared about was getting out of this nightmare and starting fresh. I sat down in the small wooden chair, feeling the weight of the room pressing in on me. I made it clear with my body language that I didn't want to be there, but Dr. Farnsworth, ever professional, acknowledged my reluctance and thanked me for attending regardless. She turned to Simone, asking her what she hoped to get out of these sessions. Simone, her eyes brimming with tears, expressed a desperate desire to reunite, especially with a baby on the way. She wanted us to be a family again, to fix what had been broken. I couldn't help but scoff at her words, the sound escaping me before I could stop it. Dr. Farnsworth, ever the mediator, shifted her focus to me, asking about my goals for the session. Without hesitation, I stated plainly, reconciliation isn't possible. I could feel the shock in the air, Simone flinching at my words. Dr. Farnsworth, maintaining her calm demeanor, asked if I would consider reconciling for the sake of the child. I was quick to respond, reiterating my doubt about being the father, but I assured her that if the child was mine, I would fulfill my responsibilities. Just not with Simone by my side. The counselor pressed again, asking if I would consider reconciliation for the child's sake. That's when I decided to take things to the next level. I pulled out my phone and showed her the videos I had received. I watched as her face soured in disgust as she saw the footage. Simone in the hot tub with other men, in full view of the camera. After putting the phone away, I turned to Dr. Farnsworth and asked, "How would you feel if you were in my shoes? If your husband had done this to you?" The counselor nodded, acknowledging my point, but urged me to focus on the child and the situation at hand. I made it clear that Simone owed me answers, and Dr. Farnsworth agreed. It was then that Simone finally lifted her head, her face flushed with embarrassment. I asked Simone if she had known what would happen that night at the party, and she nodded, admitting that she had planned it all. I pressed her further, asking if not wanting me there was part of her plan. She confirmed it. I accused her of intentionally trying to humiliate me, and though she hesitated, she admitted that was true. I then questioned how long her affairs with the men at SG Funds had been going on. She confessed it had started when she first joined the company. When I asked why, her answer was casual and infuriating. It was fun, exciting, and made me feel attractive, she said. My jaw dropped as I asked how many men she had been with, excluding me. 4 or 5 dozen, she said nonchalantly. The shock of her response sent a wave of nausea through me, and I couldn't help but think about the risk of diseases she might have exposed me to. With mounting rage, I demanded to know if she even knew who the father of her child was, and she admitted she didn't. It hit me like a punch to the stomach. She was asking me to raise a child she wasn't even sure was mine. My love for her had long vanished, replaced by a burning resentment. Dr. Farnsworth, sensing I had pushed too far, signaled for me to stop. She noted that I had made my feelings clear, and I agreed, stating that I wasn't throwing away 5 years of marriage just because the last year had been a lie. After concluding the session, we scheduled individual appointments for the following week. As I left, Simone called out to me in the parking lot, but I ignored her, my heart heavy with anger and hurt. Watching her break down sobbing in her car gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. At least she was feeling a fraction of the pain she had caused me. That night, Linda called, furious. She blamed me for Simone's condition, telling me Simone had been rushed to the hospital due to complications. Linda accused me of being heartless, but I defended myself, saying all I did was speak the truth. Linda demanded I at least provide my insurance information since Simone was still legally my wife, reminding me that I was responsible for the hospital bills. After a brief moment of contemplation, I decided to go to the hospital. Upon arrival, I provided the nurse with my insurance information and spoke briefly with the doctor. He assured me that complications in pregnancies were often difficult to pinpoint, but that Simone would be okay. When I asked how far along she was, he estimated she was around 9 or 10 weeks pregnant. There was a possibility the child could be mine, but I wasn't convinced it mattered. Steeling myself, I entered Simone's room. She lay in bed, eyes filled with tears, and Linda stood at the foot of the bed, clearly displeased. I shot her a sharp glare, which sent her retreating from the room without another word. Turning back to Simone, I made it clear that our relationship was truly over. She asked if I hated her as much as I had said earlier. I admitted that the intensity of my anger had faded somewhat, but I was firm in my stance. There was no chance for reconciliation. The damage had been done, and the trust was shattered beyond repair. I watched her struggle to hold back tears as I explained how each time she went to the store, each time she lied to me, it chipped away at my heart. I wasn't sure what else there was left to say. As I walked away from Simone, the weight of everything finally started to settle on me. I couldn't help but wonder how everything had gone so wrong, how a marriage built on years of trust and respect had crumbled in such a brutal way. Simone's excuses, her attempts to explain her actions, only seemed to make it worse. I tried to wrap my head around how she had fallen for the idea that it was normal for a wife to be with other men. The fact that she accepted that so easily, and worse, believed others who justified her actions, only made me more certain of my decision. Her tearful pleas didn't faze me. I told her, as clearly as I could, that there was no way to salvage what we had. The love I once felt for her was replaced by an icy determination. I wasn't going to be manipulated into thinking that anything could repair the damage she'd caused. She promised to notify her lawyer about the divorce the next day, but I knew it didn't matter. There was no chance of us remaining friends. The betrayal ran too deep. I took one last look at her and said, "Goodbye, Simone," as I stepped toward the door. Her sobs were the last thing I heard as I left, but I felt no empathy. In that moment, I only thought to myself, good riddance. A few days later, Jenny called me with the news I had been waiting for. Simone had dropped all objections to the divorce, and Dr. Farnsworth's report confirmed what I already knew, that reconciliation was impossible. The judge agreed, though he didn't make any anger management requirements for me. Despite the counselor's recommendation, Jenny had also secured settlements from SG funds, Ben and Dale specifically. I smiled, a bit of satisfaction finally settling in as I signed the papers and deposited the largest check I'd ever received. SG Funds, or as I now referred to it, Sodom and Gomorrah, closed its doors about 6 months later. The company's reputation had been irrevocably tarnished, and I couldn't help but think, I wonder why. Ben and Dale, after their brief time in jail, seemed content to disappear into obscurity, relocating to the West Coast to rebuild their lives. Their shameful reputations followed them, and I felt no sympathy. Simone and Linda, on the other hand, continued living together, finding work in a strip mall at a women's clothing and cosmetics store. I occasionally spotted them in public, but I never acknowledged their presence. It felt like a distant memory now, one I had no desire to revisit. My life went on, and though I stayed single for a while, I eventually started dating again. I was cautious, careful not to rush into anything too soon. A couple of years later, I met Claire Hansen. She was a woman who had also been through the painful experience of infidelity in her previous marriage. We took things slow, finding common ground in our shared experiences. We built our relationship gradually, and I respected her vulnerability. I found her attractive, but I was careful not to push her beyond her comfort zone. I let her set the pace, supporting her as she worked through her own feelings. One evening, after a lovely dinner at her condo, Claire looked at me curiously and asked, "Do you even find me attractive?" Her tone was playful, and I could see the curiosity in her eyes. I smiled and reassured her, "My attraction to you goes far beyond the physical," knowing that we were connecting on a deeper level. Amused by my laid-back approach, she teased, "Do you even like girls?" I laughed softly, replying, "I do, more than you know." Our connection was growing stronger by the day, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. What would you do if you discovered your spouse's betrayal after years of trust and loyalty? Would you seek revenge, or would you walk away, determined to rebuild your life? How far would you go to hold someone accountable for ruining your marriage, especially when it involves not just infidelity but a public humiliation? Simone's actions raised a lot of questions. Did she ever truly value her marriage, or was it just a facade? How would you handle the emotional aftermath, knowing there's a chance that your spouse's actions might have exposed you to more than just heartbreak? The complexity of forgiveness, the impact of betrayal, and the choices we make in the face of it all. How would you navigate the tangled web Simone created?